Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical. Today I thought I'd spend some time on the coronavirus and finish off with a look at some of the markets relying on Raul GMI specifically for some of the charts that he's outlined. On the 27th of January, which is where I'll start because I wrote an article then about the Wuhan coronavirus, and I just want to address some of the points I made. President Xi at that point, I think it was over the weekend, said the coronavirus is accelerating and the country is facing a grave situation. I surmised that the only explanation left is artificial DNA modification, and that's become subject of a considerable controversy after I wrote this article, not by me, but by some Indian scientists and then Zero Hedge. I said what is clear is that the CCP suppressed information, and they are still suppressing it now, until we reached a Groucho Marx who you going to believe, me or your own eyes moment. Epidemiologists speak of tipping points. Malcolm Gladwell described the tipping point as the name given to that moment in an epidemic when a virus reaches critical mass. It's the boiling point, he said. It's the moment on the graph when the line starts to shoot straight upwards. In an article in 2014 about Ebola, I called it the moment of escape velocity and wrote viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. And I'll tell you why this is the problem, because the late reporting date by the Chinese meant that the virus had already turned exponential, and therefore to narrow that gap is a very, very practically impossible mathematical conundrum. I also said, given the new hyper-connectedness of the world, for example, did you know there is a daily Ethiopian flight between Wuhan and Addis Ababa? And as of Thursday, Ethiopian Airlines, for example, still had multiple daily passenger and cargo flights to China and Africa's busiest airport hub. And I said at that point, on the 27th of January, I have to assume that the virus is already in Africa, but just not diagnosed. I said that's a racing certainty. Markets, that was on 27th of Jan, bought gold and G7 bonds. That was on Friday as the panic set in. That was 24th of Jan. Dived into safe havens, and I said at that point, next week we could see these moves turn parabolic. And I quoted, it is a curve each of them feels unmistakably, it is the parabola. They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. I saw a tweet from Stephen McDonnell who said, I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you. I'm sure it makes you feel better convincing yourself that this is some media invention. And there's been a lot of that, comparing it with the flu virus. There is no comparison because of the multiplicative nature of this virus. Modeling by a report in The Lancet. All the links are in the attachment if you have a chance and you want to look into what I'm referencing, because I'm referencing a lot of different points. New modeling study estimates 75,800 individuals in the Chinese city of Wuhan may have been infected with the 2019 novel coronavirus as of Jan 25. That was via The Lancet, and then I came across something on WhatsApp which was predicting and versus the actual numbers, and it was extremely accurate, and I just leave it up there for you. predicting that by the 21st of February, we're going to have 57.14 million infections and 1.178 million deaths. I just leave that out there with you. Multiple sources, according to RT Nach on Twitter via Scott Gottlieb MD, are saying there are more than 500,000 infections. The RO is 2.5 to 3 plus, doubling time is 3 days, unprecedented speed, and that goes back to this non-linear exponential component. Of 2 to 14 day incubation, 20% diagnosed in hospital need critical care. If sustained transmission could infect 15 to 20% of the world. David B. Collum spoke to this, not good, 50% fatality rate, and this is the number of recovered patients versus the number of deaths. They also found their models suggest potentially earlier epidemic start date around December 1st to December 15 fit their results the best. That was via Dr. Eric Ding. And this is actually consistent with other previous NEJM study that indeed confirmed this. Now, the controversy around whether there's been an insert and some DNA engineering, look at the phylogenetic tree recently published, derived using all the genome sequence. We see the 2019 NCOV virus does not have clear monophyletic support given the bootstrap value of 75, figure 1. This is from jameslyonsweiler.com. There is no doubt there is a novel sequence in 2019 NCOV. We confirmed this via sequence alignment. Here's the dot plot. That's him again. Option 4, he said, a recombined virus made in a laboratory for the purpose of creating a vaccine. Low sequence homology, highly significant. These viruses are RNA viruses and they can evolve quickly even under laboratory conditions. Bloomberg Quint, China virus cases may be undercounted even with a 3,000% surge. True number of infections may be even higher as health workers struggle to catch up with the disease. A shortage of testing kits and overworked hospital staff are straining China's health system, hampering efforts to accurately track the disease. Accurately spotting the virus isn't easy and can take several attempts, he said. A patient may be found as negative for the first or second test and then found to be positive the third time. It is like fishing in a pond. You did not catch a fish once, but that does not mean the pond does not have fish. Again, I go back to that point. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. Bianco Research. If we cannot trust China, how about the rest of the world? Non-China infections in orange, 6 to 153 in 10 days. And I responded to him by saying, I think, as you suggested, we need to study evacuee infection rate. And I saw a recent report of French evacuees, of whom 36 were infected, and extrapolate from there. I know the sample size might be small, but infinitely more accurate. As I said, the number, in my view, is massively undercounted. And New Zealand Herald is reporting that China is accused of burning bodies in secret. Chinese language news outlet Initium interviewed people working at local cremation centers in Wuhan who said bodies were being sent directly from hospitals without being properly identified and added to the official record. Gladwell's tipping point, the boiling point. And I'd written about the locusts, and I said it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal, when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. At 500 to 1,000 cases, cities will likely completely rationally shut down. I estimate 1 to 2 weeks for Beijing, Shanghai 2 to 4 weeks. 1 to 2 weeks for Beijing and Shanghai, 2 to 4 weeks for Singapore. That's E-Mostak. Then this is curious from William Yang 120, and in Inner Mongolia there is another 40-year-old male patient who was confirmed to have contracted the virus even though he never left his city, never got close to anyone being feverish, never went to any agricultural trading market, and never been around wild animals. Life in the time of coronavirus is a bit of photojournalism. This is a photo of Wuhan, January 26, 2020. And this is a photo which has gone round virally of a dead man lying in the street in Hubei on the 30th of January 2020. AFP is talking about Africa mobilizing against coronavirus as fears mount, scrambling to avert an outbreak of the rapidly spreading coronavirus strain as health officials warn that the poorest countries are ill-equipped to combat the deadly disease. There have been no verified infections in Africa to date. It's a statistical improbability. It's just a testing issue, in my view. But deep trade links with China and often overstretched healthcare systems are raising concerns about the capacity to respond to an outbreak. Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems, said the WHO chief Tedros. Stephen Morrison, of the Global Health Policy Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, said the disease risked taking root if it reaches certain African countries. He warned that such a scenario could usher in a global pandemic, but New York Times is calling it a global pandemic already. Our health system is vulnerable. There are no good specialists. With malaria, people are already dropping like flies. And then it goes through what various countries are doing. Egypt, Morocco, Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, Rwanda, Mauritius are expected to enhance screening because of frequent traffic with China, he said. People are avoiding Chinese shops. In Cape Verde, locals are rushing to buy fennel because of false claims it heals coronavirus. So basically it's of high concern, and I think we're going to have a burst of reporting cases over the next 10 days. I've got to believe that. It is very possible that there are cases that are going on the continent that have not been recognized. John Gerasong, the director of the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, told reporters this week. Update on suspected coronavirus in Botswana, numbers now at 5. Health Ministry await results to confirm their suspicion. There's a press release from the Botswana Ministry of Health and Wellness. Fly Ethiopian, this is extraordinary, continue to fly to all our 5 gateways in China, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu and Hong Kong, with the usual supply and demand adjustment that we always make during the Chinese New Year holidays. We are also working together with all the relevant Chinese and Ethiopian authorities to protect our passengers and our crew from the coronavirus disease in full compliance with IATA, WHO, CDC guidelines. We would like to take this opportunity to thank the people and the government of China for their unreserved support, and we'd like to reassure our full commitment to stand with them at all times. I tweeted, do you employ brand and reputation management expertise? This decision is going to be diabolical. It's willful and it's scientifically outrageous. And I think they're playing with millions of African lives. And if you notice, a number of cases not confirmed, have all come off these Ethiopian flights. It's a brand killer, I said, within a few days, because the statistics mean zero. This is the problem with term evidence-based, almost always used with great ignorance of emergence and downside symmetry. That was via Taleb's Twitter feed. And I said, you have a great brand. It's a brand that can be destroyed in an instant. And I also said, university scholars will study the date, the time, the reasoning, the political leverage deployed, the asymmetric power balance, and how in the 21st century mistakes such as these can turn out terminal. Bole is the epicenter of China-Africa connectedness. Bole in Addis connects to 45 African destinations. It may become the Achilles heel for virus entry to Africa. Ethiopia must suspend flights now. That's Kwabena. Then the Mail Online has coronavirus reached Africa. Sudan and Equatorial Guinea quarantined 6 patients with symptoms of the killer SARS-like virus. 4 had arrived on Tuesday aboard an Ethiopian Airlines flight at the airport in the capital of Malabo. As I said on the 27th of Jan, I have to assume that the coronavirus is already in Africa, just not diagnosed. That's a racing certainty. 2 people with high fever have been quarantined at Kenyatta National Hospital, and I put up a photograph so you can see we just simply don't have the health infrastructure to isolate and protect. This is just these are vectors. If you put people into hospitals, it's going to spread like wildfire. 1 from Beijing boarded the KQ flight in Dubai. The other arrived on Southern China Airline from China. And then in Mombasa Coast General Hospital, another student from China suspected to be having coronavirus is admitted there. And I don't know whether that's improved, but I've been there. I'm from Mombasa, and it's a frightening prospect. Now, so, that is where we sit. I think, we might have ebbs and flows in the narrative. I saw yesterday someone tweeted that the number of deaths has gone down or infections. This is just a statistical capture issue. We are in this Gladwellian moment, and we will remain there for a number of weeks. Let's go to the market. A few months ago, I said there is certainly a fin de siècle, even apocalyptic mood afoot. The conundrum for those who wish to bet on the end of the world is this, however, I said then, what will be the point? The world would have ended. I like this quote from Raoul, GMI. Sometimes global macro investing comes down to a single focus, the moment when all other factors in a big and complex framework of understanding can be filtered out because one factor overwhelms all others. We are at that point now, he tweeted. The bond market, and I'm relying on some of his tweets because he kind of pulled it together as he always does very, very effectively. The bond market, already rallying on weakness, saw the light immediately and 2-year yields collapsed, breaking key supports and a new cyclical low. As of his tweet, we were around 139, I do believe. And if you look at that chart, you'll see what he's talking about. We could just fall right away, and we could see a situation where rates go straight back to zero. He says the Fed are going to have to cut aggressively and soon. I agree with him. US 30-year 5 basis points from its lowest close in history. That's from the Bond Freak. The bond market trend, returning to Raoul, is set. The reaction of central banks is understood. The commodity markets rightly got the signal fast too, didn't they? The knock-on effects are now spreading slowly into the currency markets. That's where Raoul thinks the next phase lies. But essentially, the currency markets have already moved pretty dramatically. JP Morgan Emerging Market Currency Index is going to break down. Have a look at that chart again. Look at this crude oil and copper sink. And hasn't it been a spectacular fall, exponential and non-linear? as coronavirus rekindles global growth fears. Brazilian real is about to break a gigantic cup and handle. You see Brazil loses on the US-China trade deal and loses again as Chinese demand collapses for commodities. I think he's spot on, and I think we're headed somewhere like 5. I think the real is really caught in the crossfire. There is not an insignificant probability of an emerging market currency collapse, and the markets aren't yet pricing it in, but the signs are there. Take the Korean won, for example, he says. Look at his chart again. Now, I also follow someone else called Robin Brooks. The South African rand is underperforming, and we've been warning that this is an idiosyncratic story. 15% real effective overvaluation, current account deficit with increasingly tenuous financing, heaviest foreign investor positioning across EM, growth that has flatlined. And I wrote about this in September 2019. I called it the China EM frontier market feedback loop phenomenon. And I said this phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal. At that time, I couldn't predict that this was going to happen, but essentially that trend reversal is now becoming violent. And I said the ZAR, the South African rand, is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon. Look at the copper price, look at Zambia, which was already the canary in the coal mine. This pressure point will not ease soon, but will continue to intensify. So my final takeaway is we're in just an unprecedented non-linear moment, and it's very difficult to predict at 100% where we're going. But essentially, if you look at things like China's importance to the global economy, and if that comes to a standstill, which looks completely likely now when you look at some of the footage that's coming off Twitter, notwithstanding attempts to clamp down on information flow out of China, you've got to say that this could have only been so far part 1 of a multi-part saga. With that, I'll take my leave. My name is Ali Khan Sachi. I'm the CEO of Rich Management, and my details are to be found at the bottom. Thank you.